My wife donated blood for the first time. A week later, a woman from the blood bank showed up at our door with 2 police officers. Sir, we need to speak with your wife. I told her she wasn't home. The woman's face was grave. Sir, pack your bags and leave the city with your kid, you don't want to know the reason. She handed me an envelope. I opened it and learned the shocking truth about my wife. Chapter 1, The Perfect Life. Jerome bent and adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, watching his 7-year-old Aaron rushed past with his backpack trailing behind him. At 35, Jerome had built what most would consider the American dream. His cybersecurity consulting firm generated 7 figures annually. His house in suburban Denver sat on 2 acres of pristine land, and his family seemed picture perfect. Dad, Mom's making pancakes. Aaron called out, his voice echoing from the kitchen. Jerome smiled, walking toward the warmth of morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Roberta stood at the stove, her auburn hair catching the light as she flipped pancakes with practiced ease. She'd been doing this routine for 5 years now. Ever since they'd married in a small ceremony that she'd insisted on keeping simple and beautiful, Jerome said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Roberta leaned into him, but Jerome caught something in her reflection in the kitchen window, a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Good morning, honey. I was thinking maybe I should finally do something useful with my time. Useful? You raise our son, manage our home. No, I mean productive for others. She turned his arms. I want to donate blood today. Jerome raised an eyebrow. In 5 years of marriage, Roberta had never shown interest in volunteer work or community service. She'd always claimed to be squeamish around medical procedures. That's sudden. What brought this on? I saw an ad about the shortage. People are dying. Jerome, I have O negative blood. I could help save lives. Something about her tone struck him as rehearsed, but Jerome dismissed the thought. Maybe she was just nervous about needles. That's admirable. I'm proud of you. But as he watched her serve breakfast, Jerome's trained eye for patterns honed by years of detecting digital security threats picked up subtle anomalies. The way she avoided direct eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands, the forced brightness in her smile. Actually, Roberta continued, setting plates down. I already made an appointment for this afternoon. At Denver General's Blood Center, Aaron looked up from cutting his pancakes. Can I come watch, Mom? No, sweetheart. It's better if I go alone. These things make some people uncomfortable. Jerome studied his wife's face. In his line of work, he learned to read people. Their digital footprints often revealed truths their words concealed. But Roberta had always been an enigma. No social media presence, few friends, no family she kept in touch with. She told him her parents died when she was young, that she'd grown up in foster care. He'd accepted it, never pushed for details. Now, watching her insist on donating blood alone, something felt off. That evening, Jerome worked late in his home office analyzing network vulnerabilities for a Fortune 500 client. The irony wasn't lost on him. He made his living finding hidden threats. Yet, he'd never deeply investigated the woman sleeping beside him every night. Around midnight, he heard Roberta moving around upstairs. Concerned she might be in pain from the blood donation, he climbed the stairs to check on her. The master bedroom was empty, but light leaked from under their bathroom door. Jerome approached quietly, his instincts sharpened. Through the gap, he heard Roberta speaking in hushed tones on her phone. It's done, she whispered. Yes, I'm sure the blood is in her system now. How long before? 3 to 5 days. Good. And you're certain this will work? Jerome pressed closer to the door, his heart rate increasing. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too trusting, too comfortable. Yes, Aaron will come with me. We stick to the plan. The call ended. Jerome heard the toilet flush, clearly a cover for the conversation. He quickly retreated to his office, mind racing. What plan? Come with her where? And why was she so specific about the blood being in their system? Jerome spent the rest of the night researching blood donation procedures, DNA databases, and forensic applications. By dawn, he'd uncovered something chilling. Blood donations were routinely tested and cross-referenced against criminal DNA databases for identification purposes. Was Roberta afraid her blood would reveal something, or was she counting on it? Chapter 2. The envelope. 7 days later, Jerome was reviewing security protocols for a client when the doorbell rang. Through his office window, he saw an official-looking sedan parked in his driveway alongside a police cruiser. His stomach dropped. Jerome opened the front door to find a middle-aged woman in a lab coat flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The woman's expression was grave, professional, but her eyes held something else. Urgency, maybe fear. Jerome Benton? She asked, checking a file folder. Yes, I'm Karen Fleming from Denver General's Blood Services Division. These are Officers Andrew Peters and Derek McLaughlin with Denver PD. We need to speak with your wife, Robbery Benton. Jerome's pulse quickened, but years of handling corporate crises had taught him to remain calm under pressure. She's not home right now. Is there a problem with her donation? Karen Fleming exchanged glances with the officers. Sir, where is she currently? Running errands with our son. They should be back within the hour. Jerome studied their faces. What's this about? Officer Peters stepped forward. Mr. Benton, we need to ask you some questions. May we come inside? Jerome's cybersecurity background had taught him about information warfare. Sometimes the most dangerous threats came from those who should be trusted. I prefer to know what this concerns first. Karen Fleming's composure cracked slightly. She glanced around, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. Mr. Benton, I'm going to be very direct with you. Pack your bags and leave the city with your son tonight. You don't want to know the reason, but she stopped herself looking at the officers. I could lose my job for this. Ma'am, Officer McLaughlin warned. Jerome felt ice in his veins. What did you find? Her blood. Karen reached in her folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. Your wife's DNA sample triggered multiple alerts in our database. Federal alerts. I've never seen anything like it. She handed him the envelope with trembling hands. Sir, I have a brother who went down a dark path. I know what it looks like when someone's in danger. Get your son and go. The officers looked uncomfortable, but didn't stop her. Jerome took the envelope, his mind racing through possibilities. How long do I have? They'll be here by tomorrow morning. Federal agents and probably others. Karen's voice was barely above a whisper. Others who don't wear badges. After they left, Jerome sat in his living room, staring at the envelope. Part of him wanted to wait for Roberta to confront her directly, but his analytical nature demanded information first. He opened it. Inside was a formal DNA analysis report and a criminal history profile that made his blood run cold. The woman he'd married, the mother of his son, wasn't Robbery from Iowa. She was Elena Valdez, wanted in connection with an armored car robbery in Phoenix that left 3 guards dead. The crime had occurred 6 years ago, a year before he met Robbery. But that wasn't the worst part. The second page detailed her suspected associations with Bernard Hammond, a mid-level organized crime figure who specialized in identity theft and financial fraud. According to the report, Elena Valdez had disappeared with over $2 million from the robbery. Money that had never been recovered. Jerome's hand shook as he read the final page, a note from Karen Fleming written in her own handwriting. Mr. Benton, I broke protocol to warn you because I've seen what these people do to families. Your wife's blood work also showed traces of a compound we'd never seen before, something that suggests she may have been systematically poisoning someone. The levels were consistent with long-term exposure. Please get yourself and your son checked immediately and please run. Okay, Fleming. The room seemed to spin around him. Systematic poisoning. Jerome thought back over the past months. The occasional headaches. The fatigue he'd attributed to overwork. The stomach issues that have been getting worse. She'd been poisoning him. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text from Roberta. Stuck in traffic. Won't be home for another hour. Love you. An hour. He had an hour to figure out his next move. Jerome had built his reputation by staying 3 steps ahead of cyber criminals who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Now he needed to apply that same strategic thinking to a much more personal threat. He walked to his safe and retrieved the .40 caliber Glock he'd purchased years ago but never had reason to use. Then he sat down at his computer and began to dig deeper into Elena Valdez's past. What he found made him understand that this wasn't just about a criminal hiding in plain sight. This was about a predator who had specifically targeted him, his resources, and his son for reasons he was only beginning to comprehend. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Web. Jerome's fingers flew across the keyboard as he dove deeper into Elena Valdez's background. His cybersecurity expertise gave him access to databases and cross-referencing tools that most people couldn't navigate. What he discovered painted a horrifying picture of calculated deception. Elena Valdez wasn't just a bank robber who'd assumed a new identity. She was part of a sophisticated long-term fraud operation. Jerome pulled up property records, financial documents, and social media archives that revealed her pattern. She targeted successful men, married them under false identities, slowly poisoned them while gaining access to their assets, then disappeared after their deaths appeared natural. He wasn't her first victim. Court records from 3 different states showed similar cases. Harold Chun, a software engineer in Seattle, had died of natural causes at age 41 after marrying a woman named Sarah Mitchell. David Rodriguez, a real estate developer in Phoenix, had passed away from complications related to stress and overwork after marrying Jennifer Walsh. Elena Valdez had been both Sarah Mitchell and Jennifer Walsh. Jerome's blood ran cold as he calculated the timeline. Each marriage had lasted approximately 2 years. Each man had died after showing symptoms consistent with slow poisoning. Each widow had inherited substantial assets before vanishing completely. He'd been married to Elena for 5 years, longer than the others. Why? The answer came when he cross-referenced his business records with the timeline of their relationship. Jerome's cybersecurity firm had grown exponentially during their marriage, particularly after landing several government contracts. His net worth had increased from $2 million to over $15 million in 5 years. She'd been waiting for him to get richer. Jerome heard a car in the driveway and quickly minimized his screens. Through the window, he saw Roberta Elena getting out of her Honda with Aaron. They were laughing about something. Aaron carrying a bag from the toy store. His son, his innocent 7-year-old son who called this woman Mom. Jerome's mind raced through scenarios. Confronting her directly would put Aaron in danger. Running, as Karen Fleming suggested, might work short-term, but Elena had connections to dangerous people. She'd find them eventually. No, Jerome realized. He needed to be smarter than that. "Honey, we're home," Elena called out, her voice carrying that same false warmth he now recognized as calculated performance. "In here," Jerome replied, pulling up a work document on his screen to appear normal. Aaron bounded into the office first, holding up a new action figure. "Dad, Mom bought me the robot that transforms into a dinosaur." "That's great, buddy," Jerome said, pulling his son close for a hug that he held a little too long. The thought of Elena planning to take Aaron away or worse made his jaw clench. Elena appeared in the doorway, studying Jerome's face with eyes that he now saw were constantly analyzing, calculating. "Everything all right? You look tense." "Just work stress." Jerome lied smoothly. "Big client presentation tomorrow." She nodded, but Jerome caught her glancing at his desk, her gaze lingering on the closed envelope from Karen Fleming that he'd carelessly left visible. "What's that?" she asked casually. "Medical forms for my physical next week." Jerome improvised. "Dr. Martinez wants updated blood work." Something flickered across Elena's face. Surprise, then concern, then calculation. "Blood work for what?" "Routine stuff. You know how doctors are." "Jerome, watch her reaction carefully." "Actually, I've been feeling pretty run down lately. Headaches, stomach issues. Maybe I should get checked out sooner." Elena's smile became forced. "I'm sure it's just stress from work. Maybe you should take a vacation. We could go somewhere far away. Just the 3 of us." There was the beginning of her exit strategy. "That sounds wonderful," Jerome said. "Where are you thinking?" "Somewhere tropical. Maybe Costa Rica. I hear it's beautiful this time of year." "Costa Rica, a country with no extradition treaty for many types of crimes." "I'll look into it," Jerome said. "But first, let me get this blood work done. I want to make sure I'm healthy before we travel." Elena's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Of course, health first." That evening, after Aaron went to bed, Jerome sat in his office planning his strategy. He couldn't go to the police. Elena was clearly working with people who had resources to stay ahead of law enforcement for 6 years. He couldn't run without putting Aaron at risk long term. But he could do what he did best. Gather intelligence, identify vulnerabilities, and exploit them systematically. Jerome began building digital profiles on Bernard Hammond and his known associates. He traced financial patterns, communication networks, and operational methodologies. By 3 a.m., he'd identified something crucial. Hammond's operation relied on a specific money laundering process that moved funds through a series of shell companies before depositing them in offshore accounts. More importantly, Jerome had found evidence that the FBI had been investigating Hammond for months, building a RICO case that they hadn't yet been able to close due to insufficient evidence. Jerome smiled grimly. He was about to give them all the evidence they needed. But first, he had to survive long enough to see his plan through, because when he checked his coffee maker the next morning, he found a fine white powder that hadn't been there the night before. Elena had accelerated her timeline. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Jerome stared at the white powder dusting the inside of his coffee maker. His hand hovering over the start button he'd almost pressed. The substance was barely visible. Anyone in a hurry would have missed it entirely. But Jerome's attention to detail, honed by years of identifying subtle digital intrusions, had saved his life. He photographed the powder with a macro lens, then carefully collected samples in small vials he normally used for collecting evidence of corporate data breaches. If Elena had accelerated her timeline, it meant something had spooked her. The blood test. She was afraid Jerome's medical examination would reveal the systematic poisoning. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text. Working late tonight, don't wait up. Pizza money on counter for you and Aaron. Are working late. Elena had never worked a day since they'd been married, claiming she needed time to heal from her traumatic childhood. Another lie in a web of deception. Jerome realized this might be his chance to search the house while she was gone. He'd lived with this woman for 5 years, but had never been suspicious enough to look for hidden compartments or concealed items. After dropping Aaron at his friend's house for a sleepover, Jerome began a systematic search of his own home. In Elena's jewelry box hidden beneath a false bottom, he found a burner phone. The recent call history showed dozens of communications with 3 numbers he didn't recognize. Using his cybersecurity tools, Jerome traced the numbers. One belonged to Bernard Hammond. The second traced to a man named Alfonso Hood, who had a criminal record stretching back 20 years. The third number led to a woman named Donna Vaughn, who appeared to be Hammond's current girlfriend and financial coordinator. Jerome accessed the phone's text messages and felt his blood turn to ice. Elena to Hammond. He's getting suspicious. Wants blood work done. Moving to final phase. Hammond to Elena. Too soon. We need another month minimum to clean the accounts. Elena to Hammond. Can't wait. He found something. Need extraction by Thursday. Hammond to Elena. What about the kid? Elena to Hammond. Problem solved permanently. Make it look accidental. Jerome's hands shook as he read the last exchange. They weren't just planning to steal his money and disappear. They were planning to kill both him and Aaron. The burner phone contained something else. Photographs of documents, bank routing numbers, account passwords, digital keys to Jerome's cryptocurrency wallets. Elena had been methodically stealing his financial information for months. But the most chilling discovery was a handwritten note in Elena's real handwriting. Jake Benton timeline accelerated due to suspicion. Liquidate all assets by Thursday. Ensure no loose ends remain. B will handle disposal. Disposal like he and Aaron were nothing more than inconvenient ways to be eliminated. Jerome's analytical mind kicked into overdrive. Today was Tuesday. He had less than 48 hours before they planned to kill him and his son. He photographed everything on the burner phone, then carefully replaced it exactly as he'd found it. Elena couldn't know he'd discovered her plan. Not yet. Jerome spent the next hour installing hidden surveillance cameras throughout the house using equipment from his office that was designed to catch corporate spies. If Elena was going to accelerate her timeline, he needed to document everything. At 11 p.m., Elena returned home. Jerome pretended to be asleep, watching through barely cracked eyelids as she moved quietly through their bedroom. She went directly to the bathroom and made another hushed phone call. It's me, she whispered. Tomorrow night. He suspects something, but he's trying to play it cool. Yes, I'm sure. I found research on his computer about blood testing and poisoning symptoms. Jerome's heart hammered against his chest. She'd been monitoring his computer activities. The boy is at a friend's house tonight. We can grab him after school tomorrow. Make it clean. No evidence pointing back to us. A pause. Yes, I understand the risks, but $15 million is worth it. Plus, his business contracts with the government. Those client lists could be valuable to the right buyers. Jerome realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about his personal wealth. Elena and her associates planned to sell his government cybersecurity contracts to foreign interests. They weren't just committing murder and theft. They were planning espionage. After Elena fell asleep, Jerome crept to his office and began implementing the plan he'd been formulating. If Elena thought she was dealing with just another trusting victim, she was about to learn otherwise. Jerome had spent his career staying ahead of sophisticated criminal hackers. Elena Valdez and Bernard Hammond were about to discover what happened when they tried to victimize someone who could hack back. He started by accessing Hammond's financial networks using techniques that were technically illegal but absolutely necessary. Jerome identified the shell companies, traced the money flows, and began systematically documenting everything for the FBI file he was building. Then he got creative. Jerome planted digital evidence linking Hammond's organization to several unsolved crimes that he wasn't actually connected to. He created false communications that would lead investigators to hidden assets. Most importantly, he began systematically transferring the stolen money from his accounts back to secured accounts that only he could access. If Elena wanted to play a long game of deception and murder, Jerome would show her what a real strategic mind could accomplish. But as dawn approached, Jerome realized that outsmarting them might not be enough. Elena had murdered at least 3 other men. Hammond had connections to dangerous people who killed for much less than $15 million. Jerome was going to have to fight back in ways he'd never imagined. Chapter 5. The trap takes shape. Jerome woke Wednesday morning to the smell of bacon and Elena's cheerful humming from the kitchen. The same performance she'd given him for 5 years, now revealed as the calculated behavior of a predator. He checked his hidden cameras from his phone and saw that Elena had been up since 5 a.m. cleaning and organizing with unusual thoroughness. She was preparing for their departure. "Morning, sleepyhead," Elena said as Jerome entered the kitchen. She handed him a cup of coffee with a bright smile. "You look better. Maybe you're finally getting over whatever was making you feel sick." Jerome accepted the coffee, but didn't drink it. Instead, he took it to the sink and poured it out, feigning a sudden stomach issue. "Actually, I think I need to stick to water for now. My stomach is still bothering me." Elena's smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course. I hope you feel better soon." Jerome's phone rang. A call he'd been expecting. "This is Jerome. Mr. Benton, this is Dr. Martinez's office. We had a cancellation this morning. Could you come in at 10 a.m. for your blood work instead of next week?" "Perfect," Jerome said loud enough for Elena to hear clearly. "I'll be there at 10. He'd arranged the call himself using a voice actor from one of his client companies. Elena couldn't know that. "Blood work today?" Elena asked, and Jerome caught the slight tension in her voice. "Yeah, they had an opening. Might as well get it over with." Jerome studied her face. "Unless you think I should wait." No. If you're feeling sick, you should definitely get checked out." Elena turned back to the stove, but Jerome saw her hands trembling slightly. At 9:45 a.m., Jerome left for his fake doctor's appointment. Instead, he drove to a secure location, a storage facility where he moved critical documents and backup equipment years ago as part of his disaster recovery planning. Jerome spent an hour transferring files to secured servers, documenting everything he discovered about Elena and her associates. He uploaded the evidence to multiple law enforcement databases using anonymous channels that would eventually reach the FBI task force investigating Hammond. But he also did something else, something that would have horrified his former ethical self. Jerome accessed Hammond's personal financial accounts and began transferring money to accounts controlled by Hammond's competitors and enemies. He planted digital evidence suggesting that Hammond had been stealing from his own crew. In the criminal underworld, such betrayal was typically met with swift and permanent justice. If Elena wanted to eliminate loose ends, Jerome would create some loose ends that would eliminate her first. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How did the appointment go?" Jerome responded. "Still waiting for results. Doctor wants to run additional tests tomorrow. Says my blood work shows some abnormalities." The response came immediately. "What kind of abnormalities?" "Not sure yet. Something about toxin levels." Doctor seemed concerned. There was no response for several minutes. Then coming home early. "Need to talk." Jerome smiled grimly. His fake medical crisis was forcing Elena to move even faster than planned, which would make her sloppy. He drove to Aaron's school and checked his son out early, claiming a family emergency. As they drove home, Jerome looked at Aaron in the rear-view mirror. Innocent, trusting, completely unaware that the woman he called mom was planning to kill him. "Dad, is something wrong?" Aaron asked. "You look scared." Jerome met his son's eyes in the mirror. "Aaron, I need you to listen carefully. Do you remember the safe word we talked about? The one for emergencies." "Thunder," Aaron said immediately. "Good. If I say that word tonight, I need you to go directly to our neighbor, Mr. Yang's house, and call 911. Don't pack anything. Don't ask questions. Just run as fast as you can. Understand?" Aaron's eyes widened. "Is Mom okay?" Jerome's heart broke a little. Aaron would learn soon enough that the woman he thought was his mother was actually a stranger who'd been living among them like a parasite. "Mom will be fine," Jerome lied. "This is just a precaution." When they arrived home, Elena was waiting in the living room with 2 suitcases. Her friendly mask had slipped, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I've been thinking," she said. "We should take that vacation we talked about tonight." Jerome set down his keys carefully, his hand moving closer to the concealed pistol he now carried. "Tonight, it seems rushed. Your health scare made me realize how precious time is. I found us a flight to Costa Rica, leaving at midnight." Elena's eyes never left his face. "Already booked it." "What about Aaron's school?" "My work commitments." "Health is more important than work," Elena said. "Aaron can catch up on school later." Aaron looked between his parents, confusion clear on his face. Jerome could see that his son sensed the tension but didn't understand its source. "That sounds wonderful," Jerome said carefully, "but I like to wait until my test results come back." The doctor seemed really concerned about those toxin levels. Elena's mask slipped further. "What exactly did he say about toxins?" He asked if I'd been exposed to anything unusual at home or work. Said the levels were consistent with systematic exposure over months. Jerome watched Elena's reaction. He wanted to test the whole family for similar exposure. Something flickered in Elena's eyes. Panic, then calculation, then cold resolve. You know what, Elena said, her voice suddenly bright again. You're absolutely right. We should all get tested before we travel, just to be safe. Jerome felt ice in his veins. Elena had just agreed to something that would expose her crimes, which meant she had no intention of any of them living long enough for blood test matter. She was moving to the final phase tonight. Jerome glanced at the clock for 30 p.m. in less than 8 hours. Elena and her associates planned to murder him and Aaron. But Elena had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated exactly how dangerous Jerome could become when someone threatened his child. Chapter 6. Endgame approaches. As evening approached, Jerome maintained a facade of normal family life while every nerve in his body screamed danger. Elena had been making subtle preparations all afternoon, packing items in ways that suggested she never intended to return, making hush phone calls when she thought he wasn't listening. At 6 p.m., Jerome received a text from an unknown number. Package delivery at 900 p.m. Ensure recipients are home and prepared for pickup. Management. The message was clearly meant for Elena. Sent to Jerome's phone by mistake. Bernard Hammond's crew was coming at 9 p.m. to pick up Jerome and Aaron. Jerome deleted the message and began his final preparations. He'd spent the afternoon strategically placing evidence throughout the house. Documents linking Elena to her previous identities, financial records showing the money transfers, and most importantly, communications between Elena and Hammond discussing their murder plans. When police eventually searched the house, they'd find a complete record of a conspiracy. At 700 p.m., Jerome suggested they order pizza for dinner. Elena agreed, seeming distracted by her own preparations. While she was in the shower, Jerome did 3 critical things. He activated all the hidden cameras he'd installed. He sent encrypted files to his lawyer with instructions to deliver them to police if anything happened to him. And he made a call to Roland Yang, their elderly neighbor. Mr. Yang, it's Jerome Benton from next door. I need a favor and I can't explain why right now. Of course, Jerome, what do you need? In about an hour, I might need you to take Aaron for the night. If he comes to your door alone and seems frightened, please take him in and call 911 immediately. There was a pause. Jerome, are you in danger? I hope not, but if something happens, please remember that Aaron is innocent. He doesn't know anything about what's going on. I understand. We'll keep him safe. At 8:30 p.m., Jerome was helping Aaron with homework when Elena announced she needed to run to the store for travel supplies. She'd be back in 30 minutes. Jerome knew this was a lie. Elena was meeting with Hammond's crew to finalize their plans. The moment her car left the driveway, Jerome activated his contingency plan. Aaron, he said, kneeling down to his son's level. I need you to listen very carefully. Remember what I told you earlier about going to Mr. Yang's house? Aaron nodded, his eyes wide with growing fear. I need you to go there now. Tell Mr. Yang that your dad said thunder and that you need to stay there until morning. But Dad, Aaron. Jerome gripped his son's shoulders gently. I know you're scared and I know you don't understand, but the most important thing you can do right now is go to Mr. Yang's house and stay there. Can you be brave for me? Tears welled up in Aaron's eyes, but he nodded. Are you going to be okay? Jerome hugged his son tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, memorizing the feeling of his small arms wrapped around his neck. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we're both okay. But first, I need to know you're safe. Jerome walked Aaron to the back door and watched as his son ran across the yard to Mr. Yang's house. The elderly man was waiting at his door. He'd been watching from his window. Aaron disappeared inside and Jerome felt a small measure of relief. Now he could focus on surviving the next hour. Jerome returned to his house and made final preparations. He positioned additional weapons throughout the rooms. Kitchen knives, a baseball bat, a heavy flashlight. He double-checked that all the surveillance cameras were recording the cloud storage that Elena couldn't access. At exactly 900 p.m., a black SUV pulled into his driveway. Elena got out of the passenger seat, followed by 3 men. Even in the darkness, Jerome could see that one of them matched the description of Bernard Hammond. They thought they were coming to murder a trusting, unsuspecting victim. Jerome smiled grimly as he watched them approach through his security cameras. They had no idea they were walking into a trap set by someone who'd spent years thinking 3 moves ahead of sophisticated adversaries. Elena used her key to open the front door. Jerome heard her call out, "Honey, I'm home. I brought some friends who want to meet you." Jerome stepped into the living room, his hands visible and empty, playing the role of confused victim one last time. Elena, what's going on? Who are these people? Bernard Hammond stepped forward. A tall, thin man with cold eyes and expensive clothes. Mr. Benson, we need to have a conversation about your wife. What about her? Jerome asked, injecting just the right amount of confusion into his voice. She hasn't been entirely honest with you, Hammond said with a predatory smile. Her name isn't really Roberta, and she's been stealing from you for quite some time. Jerome let surprise and shock play across his face. What are you talking about? Elena stepped closer, and Jerome saw she was holding a small pistol. I'm sorry, Jerome. I never wanted it to end this way. In what way? Jerome asked, backing toward the staircase as planned. We need your cooperation accessing some accounts, Hammond said. After that, we'll make this as painless as possible. Jerome had heard enough. These people had murdered others, planned to kill his son, and stood in his living room discussing it like a business transaction. You know, Jerome said, his voice changing from confused to cold. I have to admit something. I haven't been entirely honest with you either. He frowned. Elena's grip tightened on her pistol. I've known who you really are for 2 days now, Jerome continued. Elena Valdez, wanted for multiple murders. Bernard Hammond under federal investigation for organized crime. Alfonso Hood wanted for kidnapping and assault. The third man, Hood, shifted nervously. Hammond's eyes narrowed. And here's the thing, Jerome said, reaching into his jacket. I've been recording everything you just said. Elena raised her pistol. But Jerome was already moving, diving behind the couch as he activated the signal that would bring help. The war for Jerome's life was about to begin. Chapter 7. The wolf reveals his teeth. As Elena's first shot splintered the couch where Jerome had been standing, he rolled behind his leather recliner and activated the signal he prepared. Not to police, who might take too long to arrive, but to something much more immediate. Every light in the house suddenly blazed on, triggered by smart home automation. Simultaneously, speakers throughout the house began broadcasting the conversation that had just taken place, amplified loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. We need your cooperation accessing some accounts. After that, we'll make this as painless as possible. Hammond's voice echoed from multiple speakers as exterior floodlights illuminated the yard like a sports stadium. Elena, shut that off. Hammond barked. But Jerome had routed the audio system through encrypted servers. Elena couldn't stop it without access codes she'd never been given. I've known who you really are for 2 days now. Elena Valdez wanted for multiple murders. Bernard Hammond under federal investigation for organized crime. Jerome's voice now broadcast their identities to everyone within 3 blocks. Alfonso had moved toward the stairs trying to flank Jerome's position. But Jerome had spent the afternoon preparing for exactly this scenario. As Hood reached the 3rd step, his foot triggered a nearly invisible wire that brought down a carefully balanced shelf of heavy books. Hood stumbled backward, cursing and clutching his shoulder. The bastard set traps. Hammond snarled. Elena, you said he was just a computer nerd. He is. Elena shouted over the continuing audio broadcast. This doesn't make sense. Jerome used their confusion to move to his next position, the kitchen, where he prepared his most effective surprise. You know what doesn't make sense? Jerome called out from behind the kitchen island. 3 professional criminals walking into the home of a cybersecurity expert without doing proper reconnaissance. He popped up long enough to hurl a kitchen knife that embedded itself in the wall inches from Hammond's head. You see, Elena, Jerome continued, his voice carrying a coldness that none of them had heard before. You made one critical error. You assumed I was just another trusting victim. Hammond gestured for Hood to circle around to the kitchen's other entrance. But as Hood moved past the dining room, motion sensors triggered a cascade of falling objects. Everything from books to decorative items to Aaron's toy building blocks scattered strategically to create chaos and noise. But I've spent my entire career hunting predators. Jerome's voice continued from the speakers. People who hide in digital shadows, thinking they're smarter than everyone else. People exactly like you. Elena fired twice more at Jerome's voice, but he was already moving to his next position. From the pantry, Jerome called out, Did you know, Bernard, that your financial records are currently being downloaded by FBI servers? Every shell company, every money transfer, every communication with Elena? Hammond's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Jerome's laugh was cold. Elena, check your burner phone. See if you can reach Donna. Elena fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. After a moment, her face went white. Bernard is disconnected. The number doesn't work anymore. That's because Jerome continued. Ms. Vaughn was arrested about an hour ago. Seems someone provided federal agents with detailed evidence of her role in money laundering operations. This was actually a lie. Jerome hadn't been able to arrange Donna's arrest. But Elena didn't know that. Hood had finally made it to the kitchen side entrance. He kicked open the door, pistol raised, only to trigger Jerome's most elaborate trap. A thin wire released a bag of flour that exploded in Hood's face, temporarily blinding him. In the same instant, Jerome emerged from the pantry behind him. Years of staying in shape had kept Jerome stronger than his enemies expected. He brought a cast iron skillet down on Hood's gun hand. Hearing bones crack, Hood screamed and dropped his weapon. Jerome kicked the pistol away and grabbed Hood in a chokehold. "Elena," he shouted. "Drop your gun or I snap your friend's neck." "Don't listen to him," Hammond yelled. "He's not a killer." "You're right," Jerome said calmly. "Normally, I'm not. But you threatened my son." Something in Jerome's tone made Hammond step back. Elena's hand wavered. "Here's what's going to happen." Jerome continued, tightening his grip until it started making choking sounds. "Elena, you're going to put down your weapon and tell me exactly where you've hidden my money." I can't," Elena stammered. "Wrong answer." Jerome applied more pressure. Hood's face was turning purple. "Offshore accounts." Elena blurted out. "Bernard has the routing numbers." Jerome looked at Hammond, who was calculating whether he could get a clean shot. "Bernard, you're going to give me those routing numbers or I'm going to release the evidence I've gathered to some very interesting people." "What people?" "Remember those competitors' accounts I transferred money to earlier? Turns out they're very interested in learning who's been stealing from them. Amazing how easy it is to forge communications in the digital age." Hammond's face went ashen. In the criminal underworld, being suspected of stealing from other criminals was a death sentence. "You set us up," Hammond whispered. "From the moment I found out who Elena really was," Jerome confirmed. "Did you think you were dealing with some suburban husband who'd roll over and die quietly?" Jerome released Hood, who collapsed, gasping to the floor. But instead of helping his associate, Hammond raised his pistol toward Jerome. "Maybe not," Hammond said. "But you're still going to die tonight." That's when Roland Yang's voice called out from the front door. "Police. The house is surrounded." It wasn't actually police. It was Jerome's elderly neighbor with a megaphone. Following instructions Jerome had given him. But in the chaos and stress of the situation, Hammond hesitated just long enough. Jerome dove toward the fallen pistol as sirens, real ones this time, began wailing in the distance. The final act of Jerome's plan was about to begin. Chapter 8. Justice served cold. The approaching sirens weren't actually police. They were fire trucks responding to the gas leak that Roland Yang had reported as part of Jerome's contingency plan. But the sound was enough to rattle Hammond's already fraying nerves. As Jerome reached for Hood's dropped pistol, Elena made a desperate choice. Instead of trying to escape, she lunged toward Jerome with a knife. She'd been concealing. "If I'm going down," she snarled. "You're coming with me." But Jerome had seen the knife's reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. He rolled sideways as Elena's blade struck the kitchen floor where his head had been, coming up in a crouch. Jerome grabbed a heavy marble cutting board, and swung it like a club. The impact sent Elena sprawling backward into the dining room. Hammond tried to use the distraction to line up a shot, but Jerome was already moving. Years of playing racquetball had kept his reflexes sharp. He dove behind the kitchen island as Hammond's bullet shattered dishes in the cabinet behind him. "This is over, Hammond." Jerome called out, "The FBI has enough evidence to put you away for life." "Then I've got nothing to lose," Hammond shouted back. But Jerome heard something in Hammond's voice that suggested otherwise. Fear, desperation, the realization that his carefully constructed criminal empire was collapsing. From his position behind the island, Jerome could see Hood crawl toward the back door. Elena was pulling herself upright, blood running from her nose where the cutting board had connected. "You know what your real mistake was?" Jerome asked conversationally as if they were having coffee instead of a gunfight. "You targeted someone with a son." Jerome emerged from behind the island, but not where Hammond expected. He moved to the far end, coming up near the kitchen window. "Everything I built, everything I achieved, it was all for Aaron, and you threatened to take him away from me." Hammond spun toward Jerome's voice, but Jerome was already throwing another knife. This one caught Hammond in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol skittering across the hardwood floor. Elena tried to grab Hammond's gun, but Jerome was faster. He kicked it away and stood over her. Hood's pistol now in his hands. "It's over," Jerome said simply. Elena looked up at him with pure hatred. "You think you've won? Bernard's people will hunt you for the rest of your life." Jerome smiled coldly. "What people, Elena?" "The ones I've been systematically destroying for the past 24 hours. He pulled out his phone and showed her a series of news alerts he'd been monitoring. Alfonso had wanted for questioning in 3 states. Bernard Hammond, Federal warrants issued this morning. Donovan arrested for money laundering. Your entire organization is finished. Elena's face went white. That's impossible. You couldn't have. I've had FBI cooperation since yesterday morning. Jerome lied smoothly. Did you think I'd face you alone? This was psychological warfare now. Jerome needed them to surrender rather than fight to the death in his home where Aaron might eventually return. Hammond was trying to stop the bleeding from his shoulder. You're lying. If the FBI were involved, they'd be here already. They are here. Jerome said they've been watching the house since this afternoon. They wanted to catch you in the act of attempted murder. On cue, bright lights suddenly illuminated the front yard as 3 black SUVs pulled up. But these weren't FBI vehicles. They were unmarked cars that Jerome had arranged through a private security firm he'd worked with. The drivers had instructions to create the appearance of a law enforcement response. Elena looked out the window and saw armed figures in tactical gear surrounding the house. She couldn't know they were private security rather than federal agents. Time's up, Jerome said. Hands behind your heads, on your knees. Hammond looked around desperately, calculating odds. Hood was barely conscious. Elena was bleeding and surrounded. Outside, what appeared to be federal agents had the house locked down. Don't even think about it, Jerome warned as Hammond's eyes moved toward the knife that had wounded him. I'm not the same person you thought you were dealing with. I've learned some things about myself tonight. Something in Jerome's tone, a cold certainty, made Hammond's shoulders slump in defeat. On your knees, Jerome repeated. Now, one by one, they complied. Real police sirens were approaching now. Jerome's security team had called them as planned. In minutes, the house would be full of actual law enforcement with actual authority to arrest murderers. Elena, Jerome said as they waited. I want you to know something. Aaron is safe. He's been safe since before you got here tonight. Everything you try to do to my family failed. Elena looked up at him with tears of rage and frustration. I would have made you happy. We could have had a good life together. You're a killer, Jerome replied simply. You murdered 3 innocent men and planned to kill my 7-year-old son. There's no world where that ends with happiness. The front door burst open as police officers flooded the house, weapons drawn. Jerome immediately set down Hood's pistol and raised his hands. Jerome Benton, one of the officers, called out, Are you injured? I'm fine, Jerome replied. But I think these 3 could use medical attention before you book them for attempted murder. As Elena, Hammond, and Hood were handcuffed and read their rights, Jerome felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. His plan had worked. Aaron was safe. The people who threatened his family were going to prison for a very long time. But he also felt something else. A recognition that he discovered capabilities within himself that he'd never known existed. When someone threatened his child, Jerome Benton had become someone capable of systematic, patient, devastating revenge. He hoped he'd never need to become that person again. But if he did, he now knew exactly what he was capable of. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 3 months later, Jerome sat in the Denver FBI field office reviewing the final paperwork in the case against Elena Valdez and her associates. Special Agent Karen Fleming. The blood bank worker who had originally warned him had been temporarily assigned to the FBI task force as a consultant. The grand jury returned indictments on all charges. Agent Fleming told him Elena's looking at life without parole. Hammond got 25 to life. Hood took a plea deal. 15 years in exchange for testifying against the others. Jerome nodded, feeling a sense of closure he'd been waiting months to experience. What about the other victims? The men Elena killed previously. Those cases have been reopened. Elena's cooperation helped us recover evidence that had been overlooked originally. The families finally have answers. Jerome thought about those families. People who'd lived for years not knowing why their loved ones had died, never suspecting murder. At least now they had truth, even if it couldn't bring their husbands and fathers back. There's something else. Agent Fleming continued. The Bureau wants to offer you a consulting position. Your methods for tracking financial crimes and cyber evidence were innovative. Jerome smiled. Riley, innovative is a diplomatic way of putting it. You save lives, Mr. Benton. Your own and your son's, obviously, but also future victims. Elena's pattern showed she was escalating, becoming more confident, more violent. She would have killed again. After leaving the FBI building, Jerome drove to Aaron's school to pick him up. His son had handled the aftermath of that night remarkably well, considering Jerome had been honest with him, age-appropriately, about what Elena had done and why she was no longer part of their lives. She wasn't really my mom, was she? Aaron had asked during one of their talks. No, Jerome had replied. She was someone who pretended to be your mom. But she never really loved us the way a real family member would. But you love her. Aaron had pressed. Jerome had considered this carefully. I love who I thought she was, but that person wasn't real. Elena was playing a character like an actress in a movie. Now watching Aaron run toward the car with his backpack bouncing, Jerome marveled at his son's resilience. Children, he learned, were remarkably adaptable when the adults around them provided stability and honesty. Dad, Aaron called out as he climbed into the passenger seat. Guess what? Mrs. Peters says we're starting a unit on computer programming next week. Is that right? Jerome asked, pulling away from school. Interested in learning about computers? Maybe. I want to understand what you do for work. Mrs. Peters says you help keep bad people from stealing information. Jerome glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. That's part of it. Yes. Could you teach me? I want to help catch bad people, too. Jerome felt a complex mixture of pride and concern. Aaron's interest in justice was admirable, but Jerome hoped his son would never need to develop the darker skills that recent events had revealed in himself. We'll start with the basics, Jerome said. Computer programming, digital security, research methods. The rest, well, hopefully you'll never need the rest. That evening, Jerome was working in his home office when Aaron appeared in the doorway with a serious expression. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Aaron sat down in the chair across from Jerome's desk, the same chair where Elena had once sat, planning their deaths. Jerome had replaced all the furniture from that room, but he'd kept this chair as a reminder never to be complacent about the people he trusted. Were you scared that night? Aaron asked when the bad people came to our house. Jerome considered his answer carefully. Yes, I was scared, but not for myself. For me? For you? Jerome confirmed. I was terrified that something would happen to you before I could stop them. Aaron nodded thoughtfully, but you weren't scared of them hurting you. Once I knew you were safe, I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. Jerome looked directly at his son. Aaron, there's something important I want you to understand. I never want you to have to do the things I did that night. Violence should always be the last resort. Only when someone is threatening the people you love and there's no other choice. But sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes. Jerome agreed reluctantly. But only when you've exhausted every other option and only to protect innocent people who can't protect themselves. Aaron was quiet for a moment. Do you think Elena ever really cared about us? This was the question Jerome had been dreading, but also the one he knew Aaron needed to ask. I think Elena cared about what we could give her, Jerome said carefully. Our money, our house, the security of our life together. But real love, the kind where you put someone else's happiness before your own. No, I don't think she was capable of that. How can you tell the difference? Aaron asked, between someone who really loves you and someone who's pretending? Jerome thought about this for a long time. It was perhaps the most important question his son would ever ask. Real love is consistent, Jerome finally said. It doesn't change based on what's convenient or profitable. Real love means wanting the best for someone even when it costs you something. And real love is honest. It doesn't require lies or secrets to survive. Aaron nodded seriously. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. And that's real love. The kind that would make me fight the whole world to keep you safe. Later that night, after Aaron had gone to bed, Jerome stood in his backyard looking up at the stars. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if Elena's departure had removed a contamination he hadn't even realized was there. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Fleming. Final update, Elena's been transferred to federal prison. She'll never be a threat to you or Aaron again. Sleep well. You earned it. Jerome deleted the message and put his phone away. He'd spent months looking over his shoulder, waiting for some remaining threat to emerge. But Hammond's organization had collapsed completely. Elena's other criminal contacts had either been arrested or fled the country to avoid association with the federal investigation. For the first time in years, Jerome felt truly secure. But he also felt changed. The man who'd lived in this house with Elena had been trusting, perhaps naively so. The man standing in his backyard at night was someone who would never again accept people at face value, who would always be analyzing, always watching for threats to his family. Jerome wasn't sure if this transformation was entirely good or bad. He lost some innocence, some faith in the basic goodness of people, but he'd gained something, too. The knowledge that he could protect what mattered most to him, no matter what it required. As he walked back toward the house, Jerome made a silent promise to himself and to Aaron. He would use his newfound awareness to build a life of genuine security and happiness. He would be careful about who he trusted, but he wouldn't let paranoia isolate him from meaningful connections. And if anyone ever again threatened his son, they would discover, as Elena, Hammond, and Hood had learned, That Jerome Benton was far more dangerous than he appeared. But for now, it was enough to simply be a father safely home with his child, looking forward to whatever tomorrow might bring. The nightmare was over. Their real life could finally begin. And there you have it.